All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our class today. We're going to get started. Uh, this is planning for admissions, and we're covering some frequently asked questions. So we're doing something different today. We're kind of breaking away from the GRE, not completely. We're going to talk about it, but we're going to talk more about the admissions process as a whole today. Try to answer some of those frequently asked questions, and just share our experience of having gone through the process. So let's get started. I just want to introduce ourselves. I'll start. Today's class is going to be a little bit different because we're also going to be having two instructors. I'm Mason. If you've taken our other GRE Live classes, you probably know me by now. I'm a live class instructor, and on our YouTube team, my graduate school journey started with a BA in philosophy from Augustana University. I went on to pursue a master's degree in environmental philosophy, and I'm living and working in Las Vegas. And today I'm joined by my co-instructor, Jen, who can introduce herself.
Hi, all. I'm a former GRE tutor here at Magoosh. I'm a live class developer and instructor for both GRE classes in the past, but also our admissions offering. I have a BA in history and social thought from UCLA, and I'm currently a PhD candidate in US history, which means that when I'm not doing this, I'm writing my dissertation. And I currently live and work in Atlanta, Georgia.
Awesome. So, a little bit of housekeeping. I just want to share that today's class is super exciting because we not only have our regular students, but we're also streaming today's class live on YouTube. So, we're being joined by some YouTube viewers. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our live class. So, we're going to be recording this class, and we will post that recording afterwards. If you are a Magoosh student, you're going to see that in the recordings section of your classes page. If you are a YouTube attendee, we're going to post this on YouTube afterwards as well, so you'll be able to review it that way. We're going to have breaks, as usual, for questions and answers throughout today's class. You can ask questions whenever they occur to you. Ask them on YouTube. We're being joined by our coworker, Mika, is going to be saying hi to everyone on YouTube. So ask Mika some questions. She'll be throwing some to us. And we also are going to have Caitlin coming in and helping our Zoom students do some Q&A. So go ahead and ask Caitlin questions, and we'll have some breaks to respond to those. Lastly, very importantly, we have a big class, as usual. So if we don't get to your question, you can always email us at helpmagoosh.com, and we can take the conversation over there. All right, so let's get started because we, as always, have a ton of ground to cover today. All right, so Jen, do you want to talk about who this class is for?
Yeah, so this class is primarily designed for those of you who are applying to graduate school programs in STEM, humanities, social science, and a variety of other programs, interdisciplinary programs in the US. Doesn't mean that there won't be information here that's applicable to those of you applying to business programs or other types of professional programs. But a lot of this information is sort of specific to those schools that we mentioned. We're going to focus today on the most frequently asked questions that Mason and I hear, the questions that we hear from students in our admissions offerings, when we're tutoring the GRE, when we're teaching live classes. And those questions will mostly be about the application process and its components. So where should we kick off, Mason?
Well, first thing we're going to do is going to take a poll. And we want to get a sense for all of you joining us today. Where are you at in this process that is applying to graduate school? So I'm going to launch a poll here. If you're joining us on YouTube, just throw into the chat, where are you at based on these responses here? And let me get that poll launched. There we go. All right, it's the first poll of the week. Always feels good. How about 3 more seconds to lock in your answer here? Awesome. I'm going to close out the poll and share out our results, and I'll call them out for you, those of you joining on YouTube. So we are, actually, I can maybe drag them on my screen. Nope, I can't. So it looks like most of our students, 47%, responded that they're just getting started in this process. And that's a perfectly fine place to be in. Just want to call that out right away. Some people have schools picked out, not much else. hey, that's already a huge achievement. You're already doing well. And some people have some of their application materials started or pulled together. Or completed, actually. So cool. It looks like most of us, though, are still in the kind of early half of the journey. That's great, because today's class is going to really cover what it's like to be in this particular stage and how to move on to the next one. All right. So from here, we're going to just talk about frequently asked questions, Jen. And let's start in the most natural place with how do we get started? If you're just getting started in this process, what are some kind of best practices? And I've pulled a couple of questions here. Maybe we should just start at the top, Jen. How does one target a graduate school program? And just where do you start in this whole process?
Yeah, so this is a great question. It's maybe the most common question we get. How do I start? What schools should I apply to? How do I make a list? And just want to call out that this can be more confusing than applying to your undergrads. It's more specialized. You have to figure out if programs offer the things you study in. There's a lot of work to be done here that's just research work. This is really, I like to tell folks, this is like you starting your research career is this part, is finding what a good fit is. There's a couple of different ways to do it. And I advise you to do most of these. But I think a really good place to start is to talk to people that you know. So whether those are people who you know that have applied to graduate school, people you're in classes with, or really especially professors, the people that you're thinking about, oh, I'm going to ask this person for a letter of recommendation, or I took a class with this person. TAs can be helpful too. Ask them, what are some schools that I should be looking at? Here are some things that I'm interested in. That's a great way to start. When I was applying, I'm in a humanities program, in a history program, I sat down with the books that really mattered to me, the books that I was like, this is the sort of history that I want to do. And I figured out where their authors taught and where they went to school. And that was really helpful for me to sort of get a sense of where people were studying. What about you, Mason? When you were getting started, where were you looking? How were you looking?
Yeah, 100% to all of that. I noticed that I have like 4 or 5 different books on my bookshelf, all written by authors who either taught at or attended the University of Montana. Oh, that might be a really great place for me to go. So that was one way for sure. And talking to faculty, talking to, maybe there's an alumni network from your undergraduate institution. Maybe people in your major can tell you where they went to school. But also I want to call out that, yes, you should be thinking about, the graduate program. But one thing that Jen and I are big on is not thinking about graduate school merely as a stepping stone, as it's, it's 2 to 5 years and then I'm on to the next thing. You're going to be living in this place. So where the school is matters. The kind of city you find the school in matters. The kind of culture that's going to be there. How far it is from your family. The weather mattered to me. So for me, I really wanted to live in the American West. That automatically closed off half the country to my search. So maybe that's important to you, maybe not. But we always recommend just thinking holistically about not just the grad school, but where you find that grad school as well.
Yeah. For sure. Big +1 to that. And another thing that we like to call out is start big. Make a big, long list when you're getting started. It's always easy to cut schools. You're going to cut them as you go along for various reasons. Someone you might want to work with may not be teaching the next year. You may look into it and say, I don't like the weather here, or I do want to live in a big city. But start big and start really spending time on programs and university websites. Every program that you're looking to apply to, that program will have a section that is just for prospective graduate students. And you should be reading that website, start to finish, top to bottom, and really, do it with a piece of paper next to you and take notes, ask questions, but really just spend time looking at what they're saying, and then you can go on to reaching out to people, asking questions, and start narrowing down that list. But on that note, Mason, I just said make a big long list, but how many programs should we actually be applying to?
So that's a good question, and there's a couple of factors here. It's going to be a little bit different for everyone. In part, it's going to depend on how specific your vision of a program is. So if you're going into a field that is highly targeted, you're going into research that is, I don't want to say niche, but it is very specific. that automatically might limit the number of programs you should be applying to. Because if that's why you're going to that graduate school, then you want to make sure you're getting that experience, right? So it's important to reflect early on what am I hoping my education contains, and what am I hoping to do beyond my education as well. We're going to talk more about that later in today's class. But in general, I guess my thinking and our standard advice is just to remember that graduate school applications and admissions are competitive, pretty much always, increasingly so in recent years. So it's good to cast a fairly wide net to give yourself plenty of chances. This is something that, looking back, even though I got into the program I wanted to go and I had a great experience, I should have applied to more schools just to give myself more opportunities and more of a choice in the matter. But Jen, how about you? What's your rationale behind how many programs you applied to?
Yeah, frustratingly for students, this is a very individual answer. But I will say that my general guidance is you should be applying to the schools that you think you reasonably could go to, that whether that's, a combination of this is a place that I can see myself living, and this is a place where I can study the thing that I want to study. So that should be one factor in how many schools you're applying to. And then, just being really honest, the other factor should be how many schools can I afford to apply to? Applying to graduate school can be really expensive. I personally applied to, it's been a number of years now, but I think I applied to 14 schools. The only way that I could do that was because I qualified for fee waivers for all but 2 of them. That saved me probably $1,000 in application fees. So had I not qualified for those fee waivers, and you should definitely be asking, if you're wondering, the schools you're looking for, do they have fee waivers? Just Google the university name, graduate school, fee waivers. You should be able to find information. Ask directors of graduate studies if not. But that was sort of, that would have been a limiting factor if not. But you should be applying to schools that you reasonably could see yourself going to, even if you're a little unsure. But don't spend money applying to a school that you're like, there's no way I would go live in this city.
Right, and actually I'm going to respond early on. We had a question come in that I think is good. The student says that in their particular field of specialization, they're looking at some programs that have acceptance rates of less than 10%. Should they still go for that program, Jen? What's your thought process on that?
Yeah, I think you should. I had similar numbers on the programs that I was applying to. Unfortunately, the reality of graduate school applications, like Mason said, is just because of the way funding works, because of the way graduate school works, in that it's not just an education, it's also a job. There are just less openings. You should definitely apply even with those lower acceptance rates. I know how scary it is. I definitely was like, how am I ever going to get into these schools? I'm competing against, people from programs with much stronger resumes. But one of the things that we can talk about, and we talk about it in our admissions courses a lot, is that fit matters hugely in graduate school applications in a way that it doesn't in undergraduate. So you can have a really terrific all-around, profile. And if you apply to a school where your research doesn't really fit with what they do, you may not get in. You also, if you have a project that really fits with what a school's doing and what they're interested in, that's going to be what's weighed much more importantly than a lot of other things in your application. So graduate school applications are a constellation of things. There's a lot that goes into it, and you should be applying to schools that you could really see yourself going to. Don't look at those acceptance rates. Don't think so much about that. Think about, this is a school that I belong at, and apply. But what do you think, Mason?
Yeah, huge plus one. I would just add that, of course, you should be taking the kind of like financial and work components, labor into mind when it comes to applying to a certain number of schools. But at the end of the day, you miss 100% of shots you don't take. It's cliche, but true. So bet on yourself, be confident, put the work into polishing that application. Hey, you know what? 10% of people do get admitted. Why not you, right? Yep. So just bet on yourself, cast a wide net. But let's maybe take a step back and kind of calling out that already with what we've covered, this is a fairly research-intensive process. Just even finding your list of target schools can require a lot of time and a lot of energy. So Jen, how did you do this? I know you were working during while you
Yeah.
were applying to PhD programs. What are effective ways to balance all of your obligations, work, classes,
Yeah.
and studying for the GRE?
Yeah, it can be tough, right? I was working a full-time job that some days was like 12 hours a day of like emergency after emergency, and some days it was more chill. I think that, that a couple of things that you should do is one, get started early, which you're all doing right now. You're here right now, you have time. And I would say I think the first and most helpful thing to do is build a calendar, build a list of dates. When do you need to have things done by? And then start, backfilling from there. Usually, Mason and I say start with what are the application deadlines. That's going to give you a sense of like, okay, I have to have stuff done by this time. Schedule out your GRE based on that. Give yourself the 3 weeks that we recommend to be able to send your scores in, and just start working backwards, and put small deadlines and small milestones on there. I think it's really important to not think about I'm going to get everything done in like 2 days. I'm just gonna sit down and I'm gonna have 8 hours that I can focus on it. Sometimes we have to have those long days, but it's really better off to be like, what's something that I can do in the 30 minutes that I have right now? And maybe that's, on the train on the way to work, you are studying your vocab for the GRE. Or maybe that's, on your lunch break, you say, I'm going to look at 2 schools' websites today. Breaking things into those smaller tasks is going to be really helpful, and it's going to stop you from getting overwhelmed with, I have so much to do in a little bit of time. But what are your tips, Mason?
Yeah, one of my all-time favorite celebrity chefs has a great motto that I'm learning to live by. It's Alton Brown, and he often says, "Organization will set you free." And it's nowhere more true than throughout a process like this, where you have a lot of things to stay on top of. There's a lot of different moving parts, and so it's important, as Jen is describing, to dedicate time, to block off time in your week, even if it's just an hour or 30 minutes. Protect that time. Make sure you don't commit to anything else, and then have just a clear kind of plan for what you're going to accomplish in that time. Even if it's just something small, like I'm going to learn 20 vocab words in the 20 minutes I have before class today. That is going to add up, and that's going to help you feel like you have compartments in your week that are preserved for making progress on your application package. So it's really important, and it's a hard thing to do. I also worked full time. I worked nights while applying to graduate school. It was really rough. So make sure that you are you have a plan in place, and that you are doing it in a way that feels gradual and sustainable and measurable. That you can tell each week you're making some progress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think we kind of tackled this last one to some extent, but Jen, I guess any tools you recommend for staying organized, staying on top of everything?
Yeah, so I made a Excel sheet that was just a tracker that listed out like every component of the application, all the deadlines, and I put an entry in for each school that I applied to. I put stuff like, what is their typical GRE score range? What is their SOP prompts? How many letters of recommendation? And I just kept everything in that tracker. You can definitely use something like that. We would recommend that, but find a system. What's really important is to make sure that you have a place, whether that's, like I said, a Google Sheet, just a Word doc, or a notebook where you're just keeping track and making sure that you get everything done. What we don't want to see is you miss a deadline or turn in an incomplete application because you just forgot about something. There's a lot of materials. They differ a little bit from school to school. You want to make sure you get everything in.
Awesome. We actually had a good question come in from YouTube that I'm just going to touch on now. Like, how do I actually establish a calendar like this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is where once you have your list of programs kind of locked down, that you're like, you know what, here are the 8 to 12 programs that I feel really good and excited about applying to. Then you have to work backwards from your earliest deadline, right? Because in application season in the US at least tends to have deadlines in the fall. So maybe as early as late October, early November, and stretching well into the winter, January, maybe even February. So there's a wide spectrum. Unfortunately, you have to be working backwards from your earliest deadline because you have to have all of your application components together by that time. So that's where you should start with that earliest deadline and then budget time to make sure you can get everything done before then. And hopefully then, if once you do that first one, the rest of them should fall into place a little bit more easily. And again, this is where making sure you do some research ahead of time, planning effectively, getting a real sense of what those deadlines are is going to really, really help you out. So now we're just going to give a couple of takeaways and move into our first Q&A session here. So here are just some takeaways from kind of like getting started, how to progress into the next stage of your journey. Set aside time for research. Always be thinking about graduate school fit. So finding programs that are strong in the ways that are important to you, and that's going to require just talking to faculty, doing some reading, doing some Googling, speaking to alumni. There's a lot of resources, but make sure you do that research. Have a system, some kind of tracking device for keeping track of all this relevant information. Using an Excel spreadsheet, like Jen mentioned, is awesome. You can build that out in any way that makes sense to you, but that's going to be really helpful in keeping track of what school has which deadlines, requires what materials. And then last piece, sort of like if we're looking at all these different application components, which ones to focus on first can be kind of a good question, which is always focus on the ones that requires someone else to do work on your behalf first. Anytime you involve someone else in this process, it's going to slow down. It's going to take weeks for them to maybe get that work done for you. So those are things like letters of recommendation, making sure you reach out to those soon. We're going to talk about that later today. Also things like transcript evaluations and transcriptions. If you're an international student, that's something that you might have to do. You should definitely look into it, and those can take some time. So looking at all of the requirements of your target program, determine which ones require someone else to help you out. Get those done first so that the rest of it you can do on your own time when it makes sense. So those are just some takeaways. There's obviously so much more we could talk about in regards to this process, but we're going to take a couple of quick questions here.
Yeah. Hey, Mason, can we start with, we had a great question from YouTube about what grades get counted. And so I know a lot of people joining us today are probably either just started or about to start their senior year of their undergrad. And we get this question a lot. What grades are going to be counted on applications? So can you speak a little bit more, Mason, to how that works?
Yeah, so the truth is that all of them do. That is the simplest explanation. So when you're going and trying to lock down transcripts, first of all, make sure you submit transcripts from every place you've attended. So if you were like me, I took some college level classes in high school from an affiliated university. I had to track down those transcripts and also send them on because those were part of my undergraduate experience. So it's tempting to be, if you're applying going into your senior year, to think like, you know what, my GPA feels good. I can sort of relax a little bit because I'm applying before the school year's over. They're going to ask you for an unofficial transcript or unofficial GPA going into your last year or last semester, but then they're going to expect you to update them with the official one. So a couple of things to keep in mind there. That does matter. They are going to check. You definitely don't want to relax too much that last semester of your senior year. And you might also, that might inform what classes you take. It could be tempting to say like, oh, I'm burnt out. I just want to take like 3 gym classes, one major course requirement, and then just focus the rest of my time on my capstone. Now, if you're trying to keep your GPA really, really high, maybe that's a great strategy. But also, programs like to see that, you're someone willing to sort of take advantage of this time in school, that you want to take on more coursework, whether it's related to your field or maybe slightly outside, because you're the kind of student that really enjoys learning. So again, it sounds sort of strange, but they are going to be looking at that last year or last semester of transcripts, and that might inform their opinion about you to some extent. But Jen, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just make sure that you you will get a conditional acceptance, and it is like a contract. So just make sure that if you indicate you're going to take certain classes, or if you're told you need to keep a GPA, it does matter. And they can technically resend your application. Also, just really quickly calling out, because we have a ton of questions, that spring can be a great chance. Like if you can sit in on a graduate level class in your area or a methods class, that can be a great way to get experience, not in your first semester of graduate school, which is going to be intense and hard, and there's going to be a lot going on. So take advantage of that. I want us to get to a couple of questions. We have a lot of information. I know a lot of you are asking about the GRE. We're going to have a whole section where we talk about the GRE. But Mason, we have a number of students asking, I think, a great question, which is, okay, we know we need to be doing research. We know we need to be on the internet looking for stuff, but like, how do we actually find sites? Is there a comprehensive website? Is there a list of schools that are best in our fields? How do rankings matter? So where would you start with this?
Yeah, so this is a really, really good question and a difficult one because it's very field dependent. If you're someone who's applying to an MBA, for example, to some extent you are going to find really good published lists on, best MBA programs. They're going to lay those out really specifically. And that's because the MBA programs, while they vary a little bit across schools, are a little bit more standardized than, say, programs across the humanities, the sciences, STEM fields. I mean, the variety is sort of bewildering, right? So this is where it's going to be hard to find just a really definitive, comprehensive list of all the programs that are super strong in exactly the way you're hoping they're strong. And this is where, again, I can't emphasize this enough. You have to leverage the connections you have with faculty, right? So maybe it's about going to your undergraduate advisor, explaining you're interested in graduate school. They not only know you, but they know the field really well. They go to conferences. They know what papers are being written and published in the field. They're going to have maybe a list of names of other faculty teaching at other programs that they might say, hey, you know what, based on what I know about you, I think you'd be a really good fit here. So those are going to be, I would say, your first resources should be those faculty from undergrad. Beyond that, again, it's going to be a matter of really paying attention to it depends on what's important to you too. For me, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school and I wanted to write and I wanted to publish. And so it was important to me to find universities that produced really good writers. And so again, that's where it's going to be a little bit more on you. And again, this is where all this stuff takes time. But any other thoughts on that, Jen?
Yeah, I mean, some of this, unfortunately, I wish I could say, like, here is the definitive website that's going to tell you, which program does which. Unfortunately, it requires a little bit more detective work. Like Mason said, reaching out to other, to faculty that you've worked with, to other students, looking at journals can be a really good place. So finding what are the top journals in your field. I'm an American historian, so, the Journal of American History is a good one. I do American Studies. American Studies is a good one for me. And just like flipping through those online and seeing like, oh, these are some people that are writing about the sort of things that I'm interested in. There's going to be a small bio there. Where are they teaching? And then just go on those websites, like say like so-and-so teaches at University X in the history department. Google that history department, go on their site, look at what the faculty is doing, look at what the graduate students are doing. There's going to be a little bit of research, bio attached to each graduate student, and that'll give you a sense of what the department's doing. This also works in STEM fields. Look at, the articles that are coming out or what labs are doing the kind of work you're interested in and reach out. It's going to be an ongoing process. This is why taking more time is helpful, because your list is going to keep developing as you go along. You're going to be looking at one school and find another, or you're going to be looking at a school and go like, oh, actually this one doesn't really fit. But those are some great ways to start, just getting on the internet, starting with those .edu sites, look at the individual programs, and reach out. We haven't said this yet, but this is a huge thing that you can do. Send emails to faculty, to directors of graduate studies, to graduate coordinators, and ask questions. I know it can be really intimidating to do that, to cold email someone, but it's absolutely expected. It's absolutely smiled upon, and you should be doing it to get more information.
Yeah,
Can we
huge
move
plus one
on?
to that. Yeah, let's move
Awesome.
on. We have a lot of questions around the GRE, which is great
Yep.
because, hey, we're Magoosh. This is what we do. So let's just dive into our next section, which is on the GRE, or actually, we're doing like letters of rec first. GRE is coming up, I promise. But we had a lot of questions about letters of rec too. So let's start talking through this. And before we do, I'm going to launch a poll here because I want to get a sense for what you're thinking about in reaching out to potential recommenders. So I just launched a poll here. And again, if you're on YouTube, drop into the YouTube chat. Where are you at in this process? Or who would you reach out to, rather, I guess is the better question. All right. Just 3 seconds left here to lock in your answer. Cool. So sharing out our results. Great. It looks like most of our class today is really leaning towards A and B. Current and former supervisors, so people we've worked with in a professional capacity, and current or former professors, of course, those we worked with in an academic capacity. Now, the rest of the options here, it's not like they're totally impossible, with the exception of E. I wish my dogs could write me a letter of rec. I think I'd get a good one. But I think you're all picking up on the right idea, which is we should be primarily focused on these first two. And I would add an additional layer of emphasis saying that current or former professors should be your first tier recommenders, because graduate school is a professional atmosphere, but it's primarily an academic one. So those recommendations in some ways might hold more weight, but this is where, again, doing some research is important. We're going to talk about why in a second. So Jen, we have a couple of questions here. I guess before we get into these, can you speak more to like how do we decide who to go to for our recommendations?
Yeah, so you want to make sure you're all on the right track. Professors, supervisors, particularly, if you're going into professional fields, professional schools, or if you have supervisors that have supervised your lab work or research work, but maybe haven't taught you classes. Those are great people to go for. You kind of want to start by thinking, what is it that I want to do in graduate school? So for me, I knew I was going to be writing, I was going to be doing research. And so I wanted advisors that could speak to my ability to do that. You're going to want to think about that. The most important thing is that you want to get advisors who can write strong letters of recommendation for you. And we're going to talk a little bit about how do we ask for this. But you want people who can speak to who you are, the work you can do, and who can write personal as possible references. A question we get a lot is, do I go for the big name professor in my field who I've talked to twice, but like they're a huge name? Or do I go with the person that I've taken 3 classes with and who's seen my writing develop over time? I don't want to say like it's an easy, like black or white question. Sometimes for some fields, that big name is going to be important. But I would say as much as possible, you want to go with that person who can really speak to you, who can speak to your work, who when the admissions committee is reading the letter, they look at and say like, yeah, this person really knows this person, and this is a real recommendation. They know that this person will do well. What do you think?
Yeah, huge plus one. I mean, that's where if you have, it's good to like when you're first sitting down and thinking about this, draft a list of half a dozen names that might potentially be good recommenders. And then start to reflect on, okay, from which of these places do I think I'd get the strongest, most personal recommendation based on my quality as a student, as a professional, right? That's really the ultimate question in deciding where to go for references. But Jen, how do we actually ask for them? What's that like?
Yeah, so this is another, hopefully not quite as cold email situation, because hopefully you know these people. I'll speak to 2 ways of doing it. One is if you are currently in classes or just recently finished classes. So if you graduated in the spring, what I would say, some of you may be back in person in classes. In those cases, drop into office hours. Go ask a professor after class and just say, hey, I'm thinking about applying to graduate school. I'm wondering if you can write a strong letter of reference for me. I would say specifically that you want to know that they can write something that's not just a recommendation, but a strong recommendation. Now, if you're not back in person or you've graduated or you've been out for a while, you should send an email. It should be short, it should be about a paragraph long. You should say, hey, I'm thinking of applying to graduate school, or I am applying to graduate school in the fall. I'm looking to apply to these types of programs. A sentence or two at most about like what you want to research, what types of programs. And then again, ask, hey, I'm wondering if you can write a strong letter of recommendation for me. It's great to personalize that a little bit. So if this is a professor who you took a class with that just really like opened up a way of thinking about something, they're the professor that made you say like, oh, this is the thing I want to study, mention that. You want to be personal. You want to let them know why them. If you're like, hey, this paper that I did in your class, or this project I started working on, this lab that I worked at with you, that's the thing I want to do from now on. Say that. Again, you want to keep it short, and then just say, I'd like it if you could write, can you write a strong letter of recommendation? If so, I'll get back to you with more materials, like a draft of my statement of purpose, copies of my transcripts, stuff that can help them write a more detailed letter. I always include in those sort of emails, if you're doing it, like if you'd like to speak more in person, I'm happy to talk on the phone or on Zoom. But really, one paragraph, ask if they can write a strong letter of reference, write a little bit about what you want to research, a little bit about why them. That's about it. What do you think, Mason?
Yeah, all of that. And then just once you hit that send button, plan on being patient because professors are busy, especially with the school year kicking off.
Yep.
But have a plan for following up. Like if you don't get a response within maybe 3 weeks or something, just send another email, especially now that school's starting again. Professors are going to be back in their email inboxes. And just in general, even if you do get a response, have a plan, put a date in your calendar for I'm going to follow up, remind them about the deadline, check in to see how it's going. You're not being rude by doing that. In fact, most professors really, really appreciate it because they have full plates. It's going to keep them accountable and keep them on track so that you're not stressing out about whether they've gotten your recommendation written because that's not super fun.
Yeah, it's a great thing to put on your tracker. Definitely remind professors. Make sure that you're, being it will take a while for them to write a really good letter. So, if you don't hear back, wait a couple of weeks. Don't, turn around 24 hours later. And then again, this is a great place where you want to work backwards. So you want to be thinking about like, okay, it's 2 weeks to my deadline. That's a good time to check in and see like, oh, letters haven't been submitted yet, rather than, an email every day the week beforehand. Remember, professors are busy, like Mason said. School's starting right now. Unfortunately, when graduate applications are due, are also like right at the end of semesters. So people are grading and giving finals. So the more time you give people, the easier it is for them to fit it into their busy schedules. Mason, this is a great question. I applied to 14 schools. Did that mean that I had to get my 3 recommenders to write recommendations 14 times over? How does this work?
So generally speaking, your recommenders are not going to write unique drafts to every single program. Now, if your recommender has a relationship with that program, they know a certain faculty member there, and they want to speak to it a little bit more specifically about why you're a good fit, they might do some tailoring and personalization. But in general, they're going to write one draft of this, and they're probably going to submit that across all of your programs. It's not going to vary wildly between them. So while yes, it is definitely like an ask, and make sure you just acknowledge like, hey, I know I'm applying to a lot of programs, and this should be maybe part of your initial ask is like, I'm planning to apply to a lot of programs. I hope that's okay. Here's the number I'm shooting for. Again, they're very used to this. This is part of their job, and most professors like doing this work. So as long as you're grateful and polite, it shouldn't be as big of a lift as maybe we think it is on our side of things.
Yeah, so can I just, as a follow-up to what Mason just said, another common question we get, and certainly one that I asked because I had no idea how letters of recommendation work, is do I, as the applicant, have to deal with all of these letters? What happens? And the answer is most of the time, no. Most of the time, what's going to happen is you're going to start your graduate application up. You're going to put in the name of your recommender, what school they're at, or what business, and an email address. And then the system is automatically going to send them reminders and send them the request. a question we get a lot from students is, as part of that process, you get asked, do I waive my right to read this letter? Mason, why are we asked that, and what should we do?
So it's going to be very tempting because you're going to have the option to read these letters about what your recommenders are saying about you. Uh, our general advice is to waive that right, because what that demonstrates is that you're like, you know what? I am so confident that I have a good relationship with this person. I feel like they know me. I don't worry about anything they've included in this letter of recommendation. I know it's strong. I know it's honest and personal to who I am. And therefore, I don't need to read it. And that's the kind of signaling you want to send to a program. By not waiving that right, it might raise some red flags of like, oh, maybe you're a little bit unsure about what this person is going to include in that recommendation, and you want to read it over and eliminate something. So it's a small thing, but it's important. So if you have that right, make sure to waive it. To this day, I still have no idea what was included in my letters of recommendation. But it's okay. They worked. They did the job. They were part of my application package, and they're a really important part too. I just want to emphasize, like, this is can be one of the stronger components of your application package. So by choosing good recommenders and trusting that they're going to write really good things about you, in terms of why you're a good fit for that program, that's going to be sufficient.
Yeah, perfect. We're getting a ton of really great questions. So why don't we do our takeaways real quick, and then we'll jump into some of these.
All right, so real quick, focus on strong recommendations, strong being the key word there. Professors have great memories. If you've been out of school for a while, I was too. I waited 4 years before applying again. Just when you reach out, jog their memory. Hey, this is me. I graduated in this year. I took this class with you, or I was in this lab with you. Chances are they're going to remember you. Even if you didn't have that kind of connection, they might just remember you being a really great student who wrote fantastic papers. Cool. And they generally enjoy this work. So don't feel like you're being a bother. Be polite, be brief, have a plan. But I still do this for students occasionally, and I really enjoy it. It's fun. And then lastly, be brief, detailed, have a plan. Organization will set you free.
Yeah. Something that can really help if you've been out of school for a while is go back and see if you have any of those old papers that you wrote, or old work that you did. I know that I have a ton of old, comments on things in my various different school email addresses. That can be a great thing to include when you send material to a recommender, so they can. I promise you, when I reread something that a student wrote for me, it takes me a couple sentences into the first paragraph to remember them and remember what was going on. So that is definitely something that you could do as well. We've got some great questions in the chat. A lot about a mix of recommenders and what's the right mix between supervisors and professors. If you've been out of school for a while, should we just have supervisors instead of professors? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm just going to double down. The first thing you should be thinking is, where my strongest one's going to come from, with the caveat that, as I opened with, to some extent, you might want to err on the side of approaching academic recommenders, even if it's been a while. Because, again, grad school is an academic, rigorous environment. So those people are going to be able to speak most accurately to how you handle yourself in that kind of space. So it's a complicated question. If at the end of the day, though, you're like, I don't think I can really approach any professor. I've got supervisors that do know me, that can attest to my work ethic and my character, then great. Go with the strongest recommendation you can get.
Yeah, and think about, what your purpose in graduate school is. If you're doing a program that is heavily based on academic research, that's training you to do academic work, that's really based on coursework, academic references are going to be a little bit better there. If you're looking at a program that's more about building professional skills, or more about doing, hands-on research work, supervisors who know how you can do that maybe a little bit more weighted. We've had a couple of people ask, what do I do if I've switched fields? Who should I ask? That's totally common too. I will call out that I had 2 history professors and a English professor who I never took I never took an official class with, but I wrote a thesis with as my advisors. All of those folks, even though one of my history advisors taught in a century 400 years off from what I study in Europe, and I'm an Americanist. But what those advisors could do was speak about the work that I did, about my writing, about my ability to meet deadlines, about things like that. So even if it's not a one-for-one fit, like this is the topic that I want to study, if there's an academic reference who can speak to your ability in a classroom, your ability to write, your ability to think through questions, that's going to be super helpful. I know we've got a ton of GRE questions, so I'm going to move us to the GRE, Mason, but there is one really great question that just came in that I think a lot of people might be thinking about right now, that says, how do we read rejections? If we've applied before in the past and we've been rejected, what can we infer from that? How do we analyze what went wrong? And how do we come up with a better application? And I know a lot of people are thinking about that right now. So what would you advise?
First thing I would say is that rejections are part of the territory. They are part of this process for pretty much everyone. It is going to be extremely rare that someone got into graduate school and faced 0 rejections. I faced them. And I also got accepted with a great offer at another program. So the question is, well, what was the difference? Why did one program really reach out to me with excitement? They really wanted me to attend, while another just sent me a 2-line rejection email. Rejections happen for a lot of reasons, and oftentimes it's not a rebuke on your quality as a prospective student. As we talked about earlier, fit is really crucial. It's about finding the right program during the right time, having research interests or vocational interests or values that really mesh up with theirs well. So oftentimes, again, it's just about finding the right place in the right moment. Year by year, it's going to change. And of course, right now, coming out of COVID from last year, everything has changed a little bit as well. So this is where I would just, it's hard. It's never easy to get that rejection letter, but just take stock that like it happens to everyone. It's part of the process. Keep applying. We've heard stories from people that have applied to the same program 3 years in a row and then finally get accepted. And it could just be a matter of the funding landscape or certain spots opening up that weren't open before. So it's really, really hard, but plan on getting at least one and trusting that it's not the end of the road if you've been rejected.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that you can do, so 2 things that you can do is, one, reach out to schools that you applied to that rejected you, and ask politely, just say, I totally understand. I'm looking to apply again. I'm wondering if you can give me any feedback on my application. Some schools may not, but many will. Many will tell you some things. And some of them, like I got some feedback on my rejections that were like, here's what we wanted to see in your SOP. And sometimes I just got, yeah, we wanted to accept you, but like the person you were going to study with is on sabbatical for 2 years, so we couldn't take you on. So that can be helpful too. The other thing that you can do, and I really recommend, is going back to your recommenders and saying like, here's what happened. I know that can be a really vulnerable thing, but they're there to help you. They recommended you for a reason, and just say, hey, can you look at my application again? Can we talk about this? Can we jump on a Zoom call for 30 minutes? They may be able to give some insight that you can't do on your own. So I would advise that too. Mm-hmm. But Mason, I know we're under the time limit here. Let's jump into the GRE. Let's try to get as much information out as we can.
Very last thing we would add, this is going to segue us well into the GRE, is you can only control what you can control. In this process, there's a lot of things you can't control. But there are some things you can, and those are things like your statement of purpose. Those might be a GRE score. That might be an area where you can affect some change in your application package. So let's talk about the GRE, because of course that's how most of you came to find us, is because you saw that a lot of programs require it, but things are changing. So let's talk about that change. The first thing I want to do is going to launch another poll here. Just want to get a sense for how long have most of our attendees been studying for the GRE at this point. I'm going to launch a poll. Where are you at in this GRE studying process? All right, 3 seconds left here to lock in your answer. And again, if you're on YouTube, throw that in the chat. Let's get a sense for where you all are at. Cool. So it looks like most of our students today are in that kind of like 1 to maybe 2 month range as the vast majority. That's great. It's very, very common. We're glad you're here. So at this point, you've already invested some time into this application component. But let's talk about the role this plays by answering some of these FAQs. So the first one is, Jen, what role does the GRE really play in my application?
Yeah, so this is a really great question. The GRE is just one element of many elements. There are some schools where the GRE, some schools and some programs where the GRE really does matter. But where the GRE is like a make or break, you have to get a certain score, that is relatively rare. You want to get into a top 5 economics PhD program, you probably have to have a quant score at a certain range. But most places, the GRE is just one thing that folks consider. It can feel like, so like Mason said, it can be something that you really can control, which can be great because it's something that you can change. But it also, because of that, I think sometimes can feel like it has more weight than it actually does. What the GRE can do is give some, it can round out your application. Here are some specific instances where I think the GRE can be really helpful for students. If you have perhaps not the GPA that you want, a good GRE score can mitigate that a little bit. If you are switching fields or programs, so let's say you were a STEM major in undergrad, but you want to go into a humanities program, a really good verbal score can show, among other things, that you can do that work. And vice versa from humanities to STEM. For international students, the GRE can show that you're capable and really good at doing this sort of graduate level work in English particularly. You'll also have to take other tests depending on where you did your undergraduate degree, but so that can help. But I think the thing that the GRE does, the two things, is one, it sort of can often be the initial, like, if you get over a certain score, your application is in the sort of, we're going to look at this more pile. That score is usually lower than you think it is. That's usually sort of just a threshold score. But the other thing, and I think the really important thing, and why the GRE could still matter, even for those of you who are thinking about it being optional, is that it can factor into funding, particularly at state schools. If funding isn't guaranteed, so at my school, we get a stipend. It's the same for, if you get into the program, you get it. But other schools, funding can depend on merit. And in that case, the GRE can really matter. If it's at a graduate school level that funding is decided, they got to have something that says, like, who do we give funding to? And that's where the GRE can really matter. So knowing that, Mason, how do we think about GRE optional? Like, should we invest time in it? What's going on? And how do we find out the answer to this?
That is a good question. I'm going to start with the last question first. If your target program is GRE optional, my best recommendation is to reach out to that program and to ask them, okay, so what does GRE optional really mean? Based on if it was GRE optional last season, how many of your admitted students did submit a GRE score? That can be a really great way to determine, like, is this something that is really maybe not it's optional, it's not required, but maybe still expected and meaningful. That's going to give you a sense for what role it plays in the eyes of that particular program, because it's going to vary across the board, and especially as more and more programs go test optional. This is where getting some insight into why they made that decision might also be interesting. Other things to consider. I mean, this is where, too, I always recommend, and I used to do this as a tutor a lot, and if you've been in my live classes, you've heard me say it, take a practice test. If you haven't taken a practice test, plan on taking one. That's going to give you at least some indication of where you're at. What are your scores looking like? If your scores are rather strong, they're maybe above some posted averages, great. Why not submit a strong GRE score? Having a good GRE score is better in general than not having one. But that being said, if this component can be, as Jen mentioned, this can easily become something we get fixated on, of saying, like, this is really my ticket to an admissions letter. It's not always that simple. And so it's the risk you run in prioritizing the GRE too much is that's going to steal time away from other components that deserve a lot of time and attention, especially that statement of purpose. So it's a hard position to be in. You have to be able to assess how much time you can really devote to the GRE, and especially if it's optional and you don't actually need it, then my recommendation is to not take it. Focus that energy elsewhere where you can make a bigger difference in your application package. But Jen, what are your thoughts on that? Because it's a big topic and a complicated one.
Yeah. We think we're here at Magoosh, both Mason and I, and all of our colleagues are here to help you get into graduate school. That's our ultimate goal. It's not to get a certain score on the GRE. It's not to, for everybody to get the perfect score. It's to get the score that you need to get into graduate school. Or if you don't need a score to get into graduate school, to not have to take the test. We don't want you to take the test if you don't have to. I think what's really important is to think, like Mason said, what can I control? How much time is it going to take to move my score up? Do I really think moving my score up 3 points is going to really impact anything? And if I already feel like, if you already have an SOP you feel great about, everything else in the application looks great, maybe you want to spend that time. Maybe you have it and why not? But if you're making choices between okay, I only have so much time in the day, I know that's how I was when I was applying, and my choices are between restudying for the GRE or really, looking at my SOP, you're going to have to, I would say, focus that time on the SOP. It's spoiler, I think, Mason thinks, the most important aspect of your package. I know that speaking of the SOP, I'm looking at the clock. We got 5 minutes to go to the end of this. Mason and I are going to stay a little bit longer to talk a little bit about the SOP and answer some questions, but I do know some folks are going to have to drop off. So I do want to call out, Mason, and maybe you can move to the slide. We do have a new admissions offering here at Magoosh. Mason and I are teaching a couple of different classes on admissions. If you feel like you need more help, if you want to talk more about this, we have a class that covers 9 classes worth of information over a month that guides you through the entire applications process, and then a class just focused on the statement of purpose. We're going to drop a link in the chat that will, in both the YouTube and the Zoom chat, that you can read more about those. You can sign up. You can use the promo code Magoosh to get $50 off that. If you want to come work with us, you can also email us at help@magoosh.com. We're happy to tell you more, but those classes will lead you through everything in admissions, and we'll be reviewing one of your statements of purpose to give you some feedback. So just want to call that out. But on that note, Mason, what other GRE questions do we have? Do we want to talk about the SOP? Where should we go next?
Well, let's segue here, as I love to do. This last FAQ, I think, is a good way to talk about the relevance of which components are really important doing a lot of work. If you're in a position where your GRE scores are below the posted averages of your target program, and by the way, if your target program doesn't post those, contact them. Ask them maybe either if they have required or recommended scores, or what was the averages of last year's admitted class. That's going to tell you a lot about those kinds of candidates. But if you're in that position, remember first that averages are averages, meaning that some people scored above that number and some scored below, right? So that might not be a huge deal. What you might be willing to do in that point is, as Jen said, maybe it means putting another month of work in, bumping that score up a couple of points. But if you ask us, I think you're probably better served diving into other areas of your application package, especially the statement of purpose, because a lot of programs say this explicitly. It may be the most important part of your entire application, and it puts a lot of weight on that certain component. So let's just talk a little bit about it. And I want to actually do one quick poll while everyone's here. Just want to get a sense for where we're all at, because it's August. We're kind of knocking on the end of summer here, which is crazy. But where are you at in your SOP, your statement of purpose, or your PS, your personal statement?
Looking at these answers coming in, it looks like y'all are in the same place that I was, just thinking about it in the end of August, the year that I applied. So, good company.
Yeah, I'm going to shut this poll down, share out our results. Exactly. And most of our classes is either haven't really started engaging on this one, or they have some ideas, but really nothing on paper yet. just want to call out, you are still in good shape. You still have
Mm-hmm.
time. It's good that if you're at least thinking about it, you have a good head start here. If you have a working draft, great. Setting aside time for revision is good. But let's just talk a little bit, Jen, about some of these FAQs. Starting with, what role does this really play in an application?
Yeah. So Mason and I have already given away the game a little bit here. We think it's the most important aspect of your application for a number of reasons. But I think the number one reason is that the statement of purpose or the personal statement is the place where you take all of this other information that's just like numbers on a sheet of paper or lists of old classes or jobs that you've had, and you give it a personal story. You make it your own. I like to think about it, and I tell students to think about it as if you had 5 minutes, in the elevator or at a mixer or just in an interview to talk to the people who are going to be making this decision. This is what the SOP is. It's a chance for you to tell your story, to give context to all that other material, and to say why not only you are a really great fit for their graduate school, but why their graduate school is a really great fit for you. What do you think, Mason?
Yeah, 100%. If you look at sort of like your application package holistically, a lot of it is fairly impersonal. A GRE score is just a set of numbers. Your transcripts and GPA, to some extent, is just a number. This is something different. This is the most personal component of your package. It is your only opportunity to address the admissions committee directly and to speak to why you are really excited about and a really good fit for their program, and why the program is a good fit in light of your interests, your experiences, your passions, your vocational goals, your academic goals, your research goals. So it is a lot, though, to cram into a fairly small amount of space. They kind of range, but generally you're going to find restrictions of somewhere between 500 and maybe 2,000 words. That seems like a lot, but when we're trying to make a case, we're kind of selling ourselves on the paper. It's a short amount of space. And I want to kind of move into this next question, which is like, what if we hate writing about ourselves? I do. I certainly do.
Yep.
How do we get started, though, Jen?
Yeah. So this is the challenge, right? This is always the challenge with writing. You're sitting down, you're looking at that blank page, and you're just like, what do I do next? I'm going to say, like, the big piece of advice that Mason and I give everybody is you just start writing. You think about the first draft as this is something that's just for my eyes only, and I need to get stuff down on the page. But I think that one of the things that can really help, like in a specific way, is think about one sentence, one or two sentences. And those sentences should be, how would you answer if you were just talking to a friend and a friend asked you, why do you want to go to graduate school? And why do you want to go to this school? What would you answer? And just write down one or two sentences. And that sounds like really basic and really silly, but I promise getting that down on the page, it's going to give you a place to go. The next thing that I would advise is then after you do that, go to your CV, go to your course transcripts, and look through those and think, okay, what are two or three on each one, two or three work experiences or research experiences that really mattered to me that I would want to tell somebody? Again, if you were standing in the room with the admissions committee, what would you want to tell them? What are two or three classes that like made you want to go to graduate school or study the thing that you wanted to study? And just write that down and start writing based on that. That's going to give you a really good in to, this is why I want to do this. These are the experiences that make me like well suited for this, and we'll get you going without that sort of like terror of the blank page of like, how do I hype myself up without feeling weird? But what do you think, Mason? What else should we do at the beginning?
Yeah, so one of our Magoosh core values as a company is done over perfect, which means we prioritize getting things done over getting them absolutely perfect the first time around. It's a really hard value to live out, especially for Jen and I, who both tend to be more perfect, overdone people. But I would just really recommend give yourself permission to write badly. This is something that I still continue to learn as a writer. That first draft, no matter how rough, I promise you, once you get some words on a page, you're already going to start feeling better about this. And that leads us into this last question, which is, well, how do we go about how many versions and revision? This is where scheduling-wise, give yourself plenty of opportunities to get a draft done, walk away from it for a couple of days, come back to it. do some line edits, do some structure edits, move paragraphs around.
Mm-hmm.
That all is going to take time. This is not the kind of thing you should leave for 2 nights before an application is due. That is going to be a really, really rough couple of nights. So give yourself plenty of space for this. Maybe start drafting one pretty soon. Next couple of weeks would be great. That way you have time to get breaks from it, come back to it. Maybe have some people that you trust read it, give you some edits on it. That is super important for as a writer. It's scary to share work out, but people are going to notice things and see things in that draft that maybe you don't because you're too close to it. So that's our kind of advice just for getting started. But Jen, how about like how many different versions? Like, do we have to write 7 or 8 different unique versions of this?
No, you should be tailoring each one of your SOPs to each individual school. You want to, like I said earlier, you don't just want to say why you want to go to graduate school, why you would be good at being a historian. You want to say, this is why I want to go to this graduate school. This is why this graduate school is good for me. So you do want to tailor it a little bit, but the majority of your application, if you are applying to the same types of programs, should be pretty much the same. The reasons why you want to go to graduate school, the experiences you have in the past, all of that. I wrote a shell. It was probably 2/3, if not 3/4 of my SOP was just that version. It was the thing that was, for every single school. And then that last part, I changed stuff around. I talked about, what particular resources or classes or professors or archives, things like that. So you don't have to write from the beginning a new one for every school. Even if you're applying to different types of programs, you usually should be able to use some of that you can apply across. I know we want to answer a couple of questions. I will say that Mason and I taught a SOP class for our Magoosh GRE students a couple weeks ago, so you can go view that recording online. If you don't see it, email us at help@magoosh.com, or if you're one of our YouTube watchers, email us at help@magoosh.com, and we can help you get some more information there. And in our SOP classes that we offer, there's a new one starting next week. We will guide you through the process and talk about writing with you from start to finish. But what are the final takeaways?
Yeah, thanks for hanging out with us for a couple minutes longer today. Jen and I can and do talk about this almost forever. Final takeaways are just, I just want to call out, this is a lot. This whole process can feel really daunting. It was for me. I just, one step at a time. You will get there as long as you have a plan, take it in small pieces, do your research, stay organized, stay sane. And then lastly, very importantly, do not be afraid to ask questions. That's true for if you want to come to Magoosh with questions, awesome. But also make sure you reach out to those resources, those people that might have some advice for you on how to stay on top of all of this because it's a lot. So don't be afraid to ask questions. There are always people out there with information who are hoping to help you out. And so, yeah, again, thanks for hanging out with us. Just want to call out last time. This is that information about our admissions offerings. They've been really fun. We're really excited to offer this, and we hope to hear from you all about how this whole journey is going. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you around.